Roll call, I believe we've got two online. Is that correct, Paul and Barbara? Paul, Barbara, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Paul's here.
Barbara? May have muted her.
I see her.
Okay, we see Barbara on, and then the rest of the advisory committee is here in person. So first up on our agenda is approval of the minutes from 10/9/24. Those were in your packet. Any comments on those? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, public comments. We're going to start with the ones in the room, and then we'll go online. I will apologize upfront if I mispronounce anyone's name. I'll read them the best I can. First up, we look like we have to Steve Kendall. Yep.
All right.
And just as a reminder, you have 3 minutes. I'll set the timer. When you hear it go off, just know that 3 minutes is up.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Steve Kendall, Superior, Rock Creek Subdivision. House Bill 2412-35 states the airport must certify the airport is in compliance with all easements. Tonight, the new airport director will present his draft presentation to you, which attests that the airport is in compliance with all navigation easements. This statement is at best woefully misinformed, at worst possibly criminal. Rock Creek has an easement with the airport that is predicated upon the 1988 master plan. This easement contains 5 limitations that, if violated, not only show the airport is out of compliance, but also terminate said easement. This has been evidenced by the decisions upheld by the Colorado Court of Appeals, and not only has RMMA found to be out of compliance with the easement, but a portion of those easements were terminated, resulting in the subsequent lawsuits in Shrill. Today, my easement still remains and still carries those same limitations as the easements that were terminated. For a refresher, limitation D of the easement states that the limitation is reached if the noise contours contained in the master plan are exceeded by the sustained operations of aircraft in the airspace easement. And limitation E is also noise related and states the limitation is reached if the noise, vibration, and all other effects of aircraft operation on the property exceed 60 dB. Now, since the 1988 master plan, airport operations have grown by almost 100%, if not more. The airport has hidden behind antiquated and downright questionable noise modeling in their subsequent master plans to try and skirt regulation and feign compliance with their outstanding navigation easements. In reality, there's no logical way that this level of growth has occurred while noise has remained either stagnant or decreased, as has been incorrectly shown by subsequent noise models. With their last noise study having been completed in 2011, you can only hide behind false and out-of-date data for so long before that compliance slide is revealed. Now, I leave you today with a quote from the 1988 master plan. The authority acknowledges and wishes to thank the various communities, counties, and individuals who have worked together in the past in order to improve and maintain the quality of life within the airport environs, and looks forward to a continually mutual rewarding association in the future. Now, it seems this sentiment has long been abandoned for one of growth, regardless of the costs to the surrounding communities, and a you shouldn't have moved near an airport attitude. My only ask is that you return to this sentiment expressed in the master plan our easements are predicated on. Return to compliance with the easements rather than lying and falsifying information. I'm not seeking closure of the airport, as everyone says people who are asking for this stuff is. I just want you to be the good neighbor that you contractually obligated yourself to be and honor the contracts that are in place. Thank you.
Steve. Mark Lasis?
Well, they just come up here.
Sure.
That's all right with you? Good evening, members of the AAB and Director Dahl. My name is Mark Lasis. I'm the mayor of the town of Superior, and I appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you all. My comments tonight are also on agenda item 4A, which is the House Bill 12-1335 presentation. And specifically, what I'm going to ask this board to do is to ask Director Dahl during the presentation on the representations that are made in the presentation, specifically about being in compliance with the navigation easements in light of the recent Rock Creek HOA litigation. As you may know, the Colorado Court of Appeals decided that several abrogation easements within the Rock Creek subdivision in Superior were violated by the noise contours in the airport's master plans, and as a result, those easements should be vacated. However, it's also important to note that this litigation and the decision from the Court of Appeals only applied to some but not all of the abrogation easements in the Rock Creek neighborhood. And the decision was based on operational numbers from 2011, which is less than half the numbers of annual operations from 2023. And so in light of that, as you listen to the presentation, I'd encourage the board to ask Director Dahl some questions to clarify. Specifically, number one, how can the airport represent that it's in compliance with when the Court of Appeals in the Rock Creek HOA litigation found that these express navigation easements were violated? Has the airport taken any steps to bring itself back into compliance with the applicable easements? Has it reduced operations? Has it changed the aircraft fleet mix? Has it conducted noise measurements? Essentially, what's the factual basis for the representation that the airport is in compliance with these easements? If, on the other hand, the airport has not taken any steps to put itself into compliance with the easements and is taking the position that it doesn't have to comply with the easements because they have been vacated, that should also be expressly stated. But again, that begs the question of what happens to the easements that weren't vacated in the litigation, which were not subject to the Court of Appeals decision and which are still in full force and effect. What steps has the airport taken to comply with these easements? Finally, I would just encourage the board to ask the director what consequences would be if the airport misrepresents compliance with these easements. Could the airport be at risk of losing federal grant money? After all, a failure to comply with this writing requirement disqualifies the airports from any state grant monies under the statute, under section 2C2F. So these are also important considerations for the board when it hears this presentation. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to hearing the questions during the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Oliver Pete.
Name is Oliver Pete, also from Superior. Wanted to start by thanking the board for talking a bit about the House bill today. Also wanted to thank the board for making last meeting more of a discussion-based conversation between everyone versus just, one person talking. I thought that was good to see. Also wanted to thank you for posting the slides before the meeting. So I took some time to look through the slides and like others noticed that one of the slides states that the airport is in compliance with the easements. There's a lot of slides about the PNAP and what's being done there, but I'm not seeing too much about the easements themselves. So my request is to kind of speak in depth on each of the 5 easement limitations and how we're complying with each of them. One of them that stuck out to me was easement or limitation 2B, which states that the airport is not to be used for freight delivery. In recent legal documents, you described RMMA as, quote, a federally funded commercial passenger cargo and general aviation airport. I think it would be beneficial to everyone here. We brought the easement and kind of talked through the limitations. I would also like to suggest one additional thing, which is to allow for public comment at the end of meetings or provide an email for the board for follow-up based on discussions that occurred during the meeting, instead of having to wait another month for more comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. All right, next up, Joel Sains.
Sayers.
Sayers, sorry about that.
No worries. Good evening, everybody. Joel Sayers, Superior, Rock Creek. There's already been a lot of comments about the representation of compliance with the abrogation easement, so I won't get into that, other than to just respectfully ask that, like Mayor Lasis and others have said, there's discussion and clarification of the basis for that statement. And if there's a limitation on anything you can say based on any advice from any attorney or something like that, that also be expressly stated, so we understand that. My comment is just kind of specific. I looked over the slides on slide 14. There appears to be what I understand, a suggestion that might go to the county that of using 360,000 flag operations a year as some sort of threshold for possible additional voluntary guidance. And so I was just curious and asked that there be discussion of where that number came from. For context, in 2023, last year, there was 281,000 operations out of this airport approximately. And obviously, I think everyone here knows what that's causing and what the impacts have been to the county, like the county's faced impacts in a world of 280,000 flight operations, including just, some examples, the FAA being asked by congressional leaders to attend the CNRs. The regional director did start attending those in February 2023. Lots of public comment about impact at that meeting that I assume you reviewed, but I would suggest you review if you haven't. The FAA noise policy review, where there was comments on that last month, a summary, and RMMA is the general aviation, the largest number of comments about a general aviation airport in the country is RMMA. And there's more comments about RMMA than Logan, LaGuardia, Kennedy, Reagan. So, lots of obvious impact communities there. There was the Attorney General of Colorado listening session. There was the departure of the former airport director, and there's 3 lawsuits against the county. So obviously this has impacted the county in a world of 280,000 operations. There's also obviously impacted communities. All the things I listed have written and public comments detailing people's lived experiences with this. I know there's some who view maybe that it's a natural and inherent consequence of running an airport that you're going to have these consequences and there's nothing to do that. Maybe people hold that view, but there's no dispute that there are those consequences to the neighborhood. So if that's in a world of 280, where did 360,000 come from? And then finally, I'd just like to note that if we go back to the Reed Hillview study, a reminder, that's the study that found that lead levels in children rise responsibly based on volume of piston engine aircraft operations. That, if you look at the ATABS data, which on your slide 13, I think the recommendation is only use that data, so I only use that data. The average 10-year period from that study out of Reed Hillview Airport was 152,440 operations a year. So right now, this airport is already operating at greater than 185% of the average yearly Reed Hillview flight operation. And I understand the recommendation might be the county that of using a threshold of 360,000 operations, which is 236% above Reed Hillview, which found elevated blood levels in children. So I just want that noted for the record and invite you to consider that and make it known whether you're considering that in your deliberations. Thank you for that.
Next up, Kevin Ryan. You take a seat, Paul. Sure.
Afternoon, evening. My name is Kevin Ryan. I'm your neighbor from Superior. I've spoken to various boards throughout Jefferson County and consistently introduced myself that way as a neighbor. It's important that I treat you as a neighbor. I acknowledge that I only have a few minutes this evening and note the irony here. We'll only hear from me and other residents for a few minutes, but in Superior, we hear the touch and go activity originating from Rocky Mountain. 30% of all daytime hours. During the summer, 10% of all nighttime hours. These are averages. Good weather days, like Monday of this week, the noise from flight schools is almost constantly present. You actually had 132 fewer operations on Monday of this week than Denver International Airport. So today you receive a presentation about compliance with 1235. Included is that innocuous statement that the airport complies with all the allegation agreements. Very simply, as other people have talked about, we cannot certify easement compliance, and I'm asking this board to call that out. The airport staff in Jefferson County are going to continue to misrepresent. Go engage them separately, and the community will. But today, I'm asking this board to take a stand. We don't need to relitigate whether or not the airport is in compliance or not. The Rock Creek judge sued, the Rock Creek HOA sued. The trial was clear. The noise contours contained were exceeded by the sustained operation of the aircraft in the airport easement. The judge ruled unambiguously that event D of the easement was triggered as a result. About a third of these were vacated, terminated, 2/3, including non-remains. So when the director today will say the Rocky Mountain can comply because those easements were terminated, maybe that's what we'll say, is mistaken. Again, 2/3 remain, and there's already been a ruling confirming there's a limitation of that. Today, I'm doing what I would do with any neighbor. I'm asking you to take a voluntary action. Make a choice to let the director know you do not agree with this presentation. It does not have your support. The mayor asked for a few questions that you should ask the director. How can you possibly comply with these easements? What due diligence has been done to ensure compliance? And maybe most importantly, what are the consequences of certifying compliance if you knowingly violate this easement? Finally, I'm going to call a bit of an audible here and talk about the 1988 master plan, which our easements were predicated on. In that master plan, it actually talked about a very similar voluntary noise program. That had the preferential airport as the runway at the time, 220, what has now been renamed as 321. I don't think you would get much of an objection from the residents in Rock Creek if that went back to be the preferential airport. That was the intent. I get very frustrated when pilots or advocates for this airport say, we were here first. The airport was here first. In fact, runway 330L was not, and at the time, the preferential runway was 2.20, now known as 321. Thank you.
All right, one more in the room, and then we'll go to online. Brad Walker.
Good evening, Board. Brad Walker, Town Superior. I'm a resident of Rock Creek. In addition, I fly out of this airport and use this airport extensively. A couple comments by the board members last month really left me dismayed at some of their comments. I think tonight the comments made by the public demonstrate that. In particular, a couple of the members said that they resent the fact that they can't talk with the community. And I too share that sentiment, but that is for everyone's benefit. As you've seen tonight, Mr. Laces, she's a real swell of guy, was the chair of the Community Noise Roundtable. I had to write numerous letters to Jefferson County Attorney, keep the board on track and following their bylaws. In addition, he actively continues to support litigation against the county. I would, in addition, point out that Joel Sayers, who made some comments tonight, is also the principal attorney in a lawsuit against Jefferson County and this airport. So when he stands up here and talks to you about how he wants to be a good neighbor, it's really about him exerting influence over this board and the airport and the pilots in this community. So I would encourage you, the best thing that this board and the administration can do is to follow the rules, do your due diligence, pay attention to the administration of the airport, and make sure we run a good airport that follows the FAA rules and regulations. Past that, there's really nothing else this board can do. So I would encourage you to follow that. Thank you very much.
Brad. Do we have some comment requests online? We've got two. First one up.
Randy Johnson, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey, Randy, you with us?
This is Randy Johnson.
We can hear you.
Good. Yeah, last time it didn't work. I think Ben mentioned that maybe there was a drop off in the system. Although I tried to connect. Yeah, so I wasn't able to give my numbers last week. This is Randy Johnson from Laver's, live south of Chatfield, between you guys and, just north of Castle Rock. So I just want to let people know I'm further south. Since I wasn't able to give my numbers last month, I'm going to go back to August, and I wrote down 397 planes, 9 complaints to Centennial, 2 to Rocky Mountain. Last month, for September, I wrote down 510 planes, 7 complaints to Centennial, 3 to Rocky Mountain, and then this last month, I wrote down 600 and can't read my writing. I think it's either 31 or 81 airplanes I wrote down. 18 complaints to Centennial, 2 to Rocky Mountain. So basically, and now I'm only writing down propeller airplanes, not necessarily just training airplanes. Some of them are the medvacs to go into Centennial and stuff like that. But I was writing jets at one time. That's why I had even higher numbers. I do want to say that these aren't just planes. They're not necessarily flying directly over my house. I can hear them, when they're north, south, east, and west. So when I say I write down airplanes, they're not, some aren't directly over. And that's why you don't see me doing complaints on, you know, planes that are basically just flying over. They're not doing anything to, that I think I should notify you guys. It's just an FYI. I do want to say, like I said, many planes are, they are spreading out. I know I say this almost every time, but I do want to let you know that they're spreading out, so they're not focused, on the noise being louder. And I do say this too. I do want to thank the pilots that aren't, flying directly over. Sometimes they fly over directly over going south, and then move over going north or the other way. So, like I said, I do hear lots of planes, obviously still, but many are being good, and I do want to let you guys know that. And I think they're doing like you guys have requested, fly a little higher, possibly fly a little slower so the noise isn't as loud. So they're pretty good. I don't want to. I think that's all I have. Appreciate you letting me call in and talk to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
And then I have one more, Jason Fartman. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey, Jason, can you hear us? You with us, Jason?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep. We can hear you.
Hi, Jason Farbman, Westbrook. I'm south of the airport, about 2 miles from the runway. Yeah, I had some points I wanted to bring up about the noise abatement program. So firstly, I'm a data-driven person, and I'd really be interested in seeing the data behind some of the decisions. So somebody brought up previously the 30,000 number, with if that is exceeded and within a month, that maybe voluntarily choose to fly different times or elsewhere. Curious how that number was determined. I'm curious how the 10 touch and go limit was determined. That's equivalent to about an hour of flying time. So how was that number determined to be beneficial to the community? I'd like to know like the expected reduction in touch and go operations, like based on 2024 numbers, how many of touch and goes were more than 10 by a specific tail. I know there's a voluntary measure about 8 tails in the pattern being kind of the maximum. If there's more than 8, you should consider flying elsewhere. Again, if there's 8 tails in the pattern doing touch and goes, that's a touch and go about, or at the plane over somebody's head about every 30 to 40 seconds. So how is that determined to be successful part of this noise abatement program? I'd really like to see some kind of modeling. As people said before, the average of the 40-year average before 2021 was about 150,000 flights. So there's just been a significant increase over a short period of time. I do want to read a statement from HB 1235 that's about what the noise abatement program is supposed to do. It says, so that aircraft noise is not a significant public nuisance and does not cause significant adverse impacts to the health, safety, and welfare of individuals residing near the airport. I'd like to know how this noise abatement program does that. I'd like to see statistics anecdotally from my just looking at ADSB data all the time. I see this as maybe a 3% decrease in like total touch and go operations. It seems very insignificant to me. So I'd really like to know the data. I'd like the airport to be able to prove me wrong on that and show how this is gonna be a significant reduction and cause much less noise. And just in general, I'm also not trying to close the airport. I'm not one of those people. I'm looking for a balance, community interaction. And I have to say, it's typically people like Brad Walker who make the community distrust the airport. It's the type of comments he makes that make this distrust. We really just want balance. That's what I want. I understand the value of pilots. I understand the value of the airport. But at the same point, the burden this has put on the community is just extremely strenuous, and we just want some balance in my neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Any other online comments?
That's it.
All right, we're gonna close the public comment period and we're gonna go into our first business item. Actually, I had one thing I wanted to ask and follow-up email to the board. I did think that there was a email out there for comments. Is that not the case?
There isn't, but Jeffco could create one.
Okay,
There's actually a placeholder for one, but we haven't like activated it.
okay. I think that would probably be great because I do agree with that comment. If you had the ability to follow up with some questions in between.
I guess I would just say like want to check with the attorney's office and then with the county clerk to make sure we're good to go with that.
Perfect, thank you. All right, first business item, House Bill 24-1235. I think I'm turning this over to Eric.
All right, House Bill 24-1235, reduce aviation impacts on communities. Next slide. So House Bill 1235 was effective on May 17th, 2024, and requires the airport to do a number of different tasks. The first is by January 1st, 2026, has adopted a plan for the phasing out of leaded aviation gasoline at the airport by January 1st, 2030. Second is a publication of a noise abatement plan among all airport operators. The next point is include as elements of the noise abatement plan a voluntary curfew on flights that may depart from the airport, voluntary guideline on the number of flights that may depart from the airport within specified periods, and voluntary guidelines of the frequency of touch and go flights. Next slide, please. Continuing off from that, the House bill requires the noise abatement plan must properly be posted at each airport. The airport will meet with airport operators on a regular basis to inform the parties of noise abatement procedures and how operators may comply with those procedures. The airport will post on its website an internal communications plan detailing how the noise abatement plan will be made available to operators and how the operator should understand the plan. Next slide. The airport must submit the plan to the FAA. The airport must certify that the airport is in compliance with all easements, and the airport must certify that the airport is in compliance with all applicable federal rules and regular laws and regulations. The airport has no authority to set rules and regulations for the use of the national airspace system. The airport can require pilots or cannot require pilots or operators to comply with the guidelines that contrast those rules and regulations. We can establish voluntary guidelines for pilots and operators to consider. The airport cannot punish or otherwise tie compliance to voluntary guidelines with potential negative action. The airport's noise abatement plan already has a voluntary curfew on departures between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. The plan also includes voluntary guidelines to limit engine maintenance run-ups between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The current noise abatement plan does not address voluntary guidelines on flight departures or voluntary guidelines on touch and go operations, and updates are required to update or come in compliance with HB 24-1235. But January 1st, 2026 has adopted a plan for phasing out the sales of leaded aviation gasoline at the airport by January 1st, 2030. As Ben will attest to later, the airport is working on securing an unleaded aviation fuel tank and has already secured the fuel truck for that process. Once the fuel tank is installed and unleaded aviation fuel is delivered, the airport will have unleaded aviation fuel for sale. Complete conversion of leaded to unleaded fuel will be completed in accordance with FAA regulations sometime by 2030. Next slide. In reference to the publication of a noise abatement plan among all operators, the airport will continue to maintain a copy of the airport noise abatement plan on the airport's website and distribute a copy to large flight operators at the airport. The airport will make reference to the noise abatement plan in newsletters and other media as applicable. Next slide. Including as elements of the noise abatement plan, following things are required: a voluntary curfew on when flights may depart from the airport, a voluntary guideline on the number of flights that may depart from the airport within specified periods, and a voluntary guideline on the frequency of touch and go flights. In reference to voluntary curfew on flight departures, the noise abatement plan does not recommend any change. Voluntary guideline is to avoid flight departures between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. unless required by training or operations in compliance with federal rules and regulations. When operators are required, within the curfew period, pilots and operators are to use the north runway, 12 left, 30 right. Pilots may request 12 left, 30 right for pattern work off curfew, if able. The voluntary guideline is to avoid engine maintenance run-ups between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. unless there is an emergency. In reference to touch and go frequency, the voluntary guideline on the number of aircraft and the traffic pattern controls the frequency at which aircraft can potentially operate from those runways. In addition, the voluntary guideline on the number of aircraft and the traffic pattern, the airport encourages pilots to keep traffic patterns high, tight, and confined. If the number of aircraft of the pattern continuously extends the pilot's pattern, the pilot should consider conducting other operations at another airport or at another time. The traffic pattern is controlled by the air traffic control tower. The airport has no control authority on the traffic pattern or how many aircraft operate within it or how frequent those traffic come. When we're speaking of touch and goes in respect to the voluntary noise abatement plan, we have 4 different buckets of restrictions or guidelines here to review. During the daytime, which would be 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., in reference to the north runway, which would be 12 left, 30 right, no more than 8 aircraft in the traffic pattern at any time. For the south runway, 12 right, 30 left, no more than 8 aircraft in the traffic pattern at any time, and no more than 10 touch and goes per flight. On nighttime, at 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. for the north runway, which is 12 left, 30 right, no more than 4 aircraft in the traffic pattern at any given time, and no more than 10 touch and goes per flight. For the south runway, 12 right, 30 left, during nighttime, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., pilots should consider to avoid touch and go operations. With respect to the voluntary guideline on departures, the draft voluntary noise abatement plan in front of you would not apply to transcontinental or international traffic, but does apply to local traffic. The only official source for the FAA Air Traffic Activity System is ATADS. ADSB information would not be used. And the reference for this previous is the most recent period with data that is usually published by the mid of the month for the following month. I.e. in July 2024, data would generally be available by mid-August 2024. In early August, you would reference June 24 data, and in late August, you would reference July 2024 data, and so forth. And that value would then be adjusted by CPI per year. Next slide, please. Similar to the touch and goes, the voluntary guideline on departures falls into 4 different buckets. In daytime, if the previous month was less than 300,000 operations, or the previous year was less than 360,000 operations, there's no additional voluntary guidance on departures. For daytime, previous month greater than 30,000 or less than or greater than 360,000 operations, pilots should consider pattern operations at another airport or at another time. During nighttime, which is 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., for the previous month, less than 30,000 operations or less than 360,000 operations, consider sustained pattern operations at another airport or another time. Previous month, greater than 30,000 operations or greater than 360,000 operations at another time, pilots should consider operations at another airport or another time.
Eric,
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
to the question asked earlier, where does the 360?
So 360,000 is 30,000 times 12.
Yeah, okay.
30,000 comes from a peak that we've had recently in July from 2024, when we exceeded 30,000 operations. 360,000 operations comes from the fact that we have 2 runways. The FAA would consider a runway able to do 500,000 operations. That would be 1 million operations total the airport could potentially has the capacity to carry. 50% of that is 50,000. A plane does not fly all the time. Planes don't fly all the time. They fly roughly half the time. So that's 250,000 operations the airport would carry on a year with a voluntary 50% reduction from the total max carrying capacity of the airport, flying at roughly 50% of the time. Add on the category exclusion traffic from the taxiway O and D CADX of 35,000, gets you roughly to about 285,000 operations today. 360,000 comes from the natural evolution of growth of the airport. The noise abatement plan must be properly posted at each airport. The airport will continue to distribute a copy of the noise abatement plan to all large flight operators at the airport. The airport will continue to request that operators place a noise abatement plan in a location that is easily visible to local and transient pilots. The airport will meet with airport operators on a regular basis to inform those parties, and we will do that in a way in which the airport will meet with the flight schools and other operators quarterly Applicable operators such as flight schools, FBOs will meet with their staff, their CFIs, and their employees monthly. With respect to posting on the website and internal communications plan, we will make the slides of this noise abatement plan available in an easily digestible format so that everybody can see the justifications of where the noise abatement plan came from. Next slide. The airport must submit the plan to the FAA. The airport will submit the voluntary noise abatement plan or whatever is the final noise abatement plan to the FAA Denver Airport's district office. The airport must certify with respect to compliance with all easements. And I will tell you, the airport is in compliance with all aviation easements. And just to clarify on the questions that we'll have, I will provide no other details due to ongoing litigation. Next slide. The airport must certify the airport's compliance with all applicable federal rules and regulations. The airport is in compliance with all those applicable federal rules and regulations. In front of you, you have a copy of the draft voluntary noise abatement plan, which is separated into 5 different sections. There's a checklist section, implementation section, a guidelines section, a procedures section, and then an overview map of the airport, its traffic patterns.
Eric, I'm gonna ask to
Yeah.
take one step back and answer it to the most that you're comfortable, because as I look through and I read all this, you've got a couple different players at play here.
Sure.
You've got the FAA that is the ultimate authority on this. You have the state that's now come in with a bill, but I guess there's only so much influence with the FAA. And then you have you that's an operational airport who puts out what is very clearly and states all throughout the bill, a voluntary noise abatement plan. Can, just to a little degree, can you unpack a little of the relationship between the FAA, how the state bill impacts the way that the FAA views this process, and just a little bit deeper on what a voluntary noise abatement plan means to the pilots of the air?
Sure. So we'll start with kind of the fundamental process of the voluntary noise abatement plan. It's an educational tool for the pilots to learn and appreciate the community and the environment they operate within. It's not a data-driven, respected process. It is a process in which we try to encourage pilots to better understand the area they're operating in and how they can better respect the community and be good neighbors. So when we're talking about voluntary noise abatement plans for the airport, we're talking about how do we get pilots off the ground and into the air as quickly as they possibly can in a way that would minimize their impact or potential impact on the community. It is purely for practical places for the airport, an educational way for the airport to talk to its tenants and talk to its users. It is not regulatory. It cannot tell someone what to do. It cannot punish them for what they are doing. It is the FAA's prerogative. It's the FAA FSDO that would be the punishment authority if a pilot did something that was adverse to the safety of navigation. The FAA is primarily concerned with the safety of navigation and how aircraft can fly in a safe and methodical way. When the FAA sets rules and policies for aircraft operation near an airport, safety is their #1 priority. It is not necessarily for noise. It is to ensure that the airplanes are safe. The voluntary noise abatement plan tries to supplement that and tries to figure out how to educate pilots and users on a way to operate not only safely, but friendlier. So that is the relationship. The airport is trying to supplement federal regulation in a way in which is compatible with federal regulation, supports the pilots in a way that provides them the education and makes them aware of things they may not be aware of. But it cannot have any regulatory authority. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So on the 5 sections of the voluntary noise abatement plan that's before you today, there's a checklist, implementation, guidelines, and procedures. What I've tried to do is structure it building off a couple of things. I tried to build off the current voluntary noise abatement plan that exists for the airport, so pilots to be familiar with it. It tries to be compatible with other airports and what pilots would expect from other airports. So when we're talking about the number of touch and goes, it's consistent across the board. So we would see the same data at Centennial as you would here. So a pilot flying would appreciate that consistency. As a pilot under the checklist, we really talk about avoiding or trying to avoid disturbing overflying residential areas where it's practical. That's not always practical. When there's neighborhoods near the airport, it's not. Climb initially at VY. VY is the fastest rate an aircraft can climb up into the air It's not necessarily the shortest distance it can, but it's the safest way for a plane to fly or to climb. Reduce RPM as power is able. As you heard earlier, lower RPMs wouldn't necessarily generate less noise, but the expectation is lower RPMs would generate less noise. Fly standard or higher glide path that would keep the aircraft higher in the air and land on the same amount of time on the runway, but lessen the exposure of noise to communities that are near it. Overfly major road or corridors and or open space when able. You will see something like where 287 comes through the neighborhoods. Aircraft try to overfly major highways north and south where they're able to. Use runway 30 right, 12 left for night pattern operations. The goal there is to decrease the exposure that we would have for the more residential neighborhoods of the airport and to focus on touch and go traffic on higher residential or industrial uses. For the implementation, as House Bill 24-1235 requires the airport to have an implementation plan, implementation is something like this. The flight schools and other for-hire commercial operators will hold monthly meetings with their staff, pilots, and other students to discuss the voluntary noise abatement plan. When you see VNAP, VNAP is just the acronym for the voluntary noise abatement. The airport will hold quarterly meetings with our flight schools and other for-hire commercial operators to discuss the VNAP. That would include flight schools, FBOs, and other potential for-hire operators so they're aware of the voluntary noise abatement plan. The airport will distribute the noise abatement plan to flight schools, for-hire commercial operators, and to other airports in the region. The airport will post about the VNAP through select interactive media such as Facebook, the airport's website, communications like Constant Contact. The airport is working and committed to transitioning to unleaded aviation fuels. That process has taken admittedly much longer than we had hoped it would take. We did hope to have that online here in 2024. We will not. It will be sometime mid-2025 by the time that we were able to get the FBOs transition to unleaded fuel. Or not the FBOs, but the flight schools at a minimum to unleaded aviation fuels. So when we're talking about guidelines essentially what we talked about earlier was no engine maintenance run-ups between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., except when an emergency. That's to decrease the noise exposure that citizens near the airport would hear.
Hey, Eric, can you describe engine maintenance run-ups?
Yeah, sure. So an engine maintenance run-up for an aircraft would be a case where, let's say, a maintenance operator at the airport is doing engine maintenance on an aircraft. And part of the requirements from the federal government is that when you're doing that kind of maintenance on an aircraft, you have to do an engine run-up. Whether that's a half hour, 45 minutes, hour, it kind of just depends on the work that you were doing on that engine. But that is a long process where you would have an engine running pretty much at full throttle for a duration of time to do that.
Okay, I just want to make sure it wasn't implied a pre-flight engine run-up.
No, it does not imply pre-flight
2
apron
minutes, yeah.
run-ups. This is a purely maintenance activity from an engine overhaul or related activity. For quiet hours, the airport would recommend for pilots to be considerate on departures such that there are none between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. unless required for currency or training per federal regulations. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question on that quiet hour ones. So if a jet wants to depart at 4:55 and leave out of here and go to New York, I mean, it says no departures. I think that maybe should be stated as limited departures or something like that, not, because we're gonna have jet traffic leaving out of here, going to other states and things like that. So I'm kind of worried about the wording there.
Sure, the wording in the VNAP would read that way. The understanding guideline, the PowerPoint that someone could read to kind of dive into the thought process, and we can kind of figure out that in more detail, does try to exclude transcontinental or international traffic from that clause. That does not necessarily mean that an aircraft wouldn't just depart at 4:55. It's a voluntary noise abatement plan. The likelihood a jet would wait 5 minutes is 0. Reduce repetition, limit to 10 touch-and-goes operations. And like I said, that's what Centennial got through their community noise roundtable. It is consistent with what Centennial is doing. And so it is based purely on the fact to be consistent with what Centennial has approved in their noise abatement plan.
So if you have a student pilot that does 10 touch and goes, does a full stop landing, taxis back and does 10 more touch and goes, they're in compliance?
I guess there would be very little way to explain that in a way in which you could fight a different way. Centennial's voluntary noise abatement line talks about 10 touch and goes operating per flight. What the noise abatement plan here tries to address is a catch for that, in which, since we're limiting the number of airplanes that are in the airspace at any given time, and we're not saying that pilot can just land and take off, we're trying to set some sort of guide for a pilot to say, okay, there's a lot of planes in the air right now, maybe I shouldn't take off. Centennials is much more vague in that regard, in which they don't actually even try to dedicate a time. They say a generic phrase such as if you feel uncomfortable or if it's not what you feel. I tried to be a little bit more specific and try to give a pilot a basis rather than tomato flames, for lack of a better understanding. Which I guess for people in the audience, tomato flames is just a mental health check about the aircraft and of your body to make sure that you are consistent with yourself, your health, and the airplane is also consistent and healthy. Minimize overflights. Use runway 30 right, 12 left for nighttime pattern operations to reduce overflying residential neighborhoods. So what we tried to do there is set the north runway as the practice pattern for nighttime ops. And I know flight schools have tried and are currently doing the north runway as a way to extend that during the day when the tower is also open, as a way to try to use that runway more often than the southern one. And the noise abatement plan does talk about that you should request the north runway if you can do so. Limit nighttime aircraft operations, limit to 4 aircraft to the north runway pattern to decrease noise impact. The goal there is try to decrease the frequency of the planes that are coming at you. If we can limit the extensions of the pattern and keep the number of aircraft in the pattern lower, we can decrease the frequency that they're overflying one spot. It will never be 1 minute, maybe hopefully more than 45 seconds, as the caller called and said, but it is consistent with the expectation that pattern traffic is going to have 4 aircraft in it rather than as many as you can, and grow the pattern to as many aircraft as you possibly could. The lower pattern density goes into that as well, such that there are no more than 8 aircraft in the pattern at a time. The FAA would tell you that there is no limit to the number of aircraft that can be in a pattern. FAA Joint Order 7200.2P says the air traffic pattern can grow perpetually until a point where the FAA says, okay, that's enough. Here for BJC, the FAA said, we will voluntarily limit the number of aircraft in the pattern to 8. So it's not that 8 is a new concept necessarily, but it's formalized into a piece of paper so that pilots understand if they see that, they know to avoid it. Keep operations high and tight. No more than 4 operations in an extended zone, and keep traffic patterns high and tight. We talked about this once before, in which it's good for pilots to try to keep the traffic pattern inside FedEx if they possibly can. That might be difficult for some aircraft to accomplish based on climb performance, but ideally, if they're able to do that, that would minimize their impact on the communities. And once again, no more than 4 operations in an extended zone is a way for a pilot to understand that if the traffic pattern is growing to a point where the aircraft pattern becomes congested or conceptually congested, they know to go somewhere else and do their exercises. And once again, 30,000 is 1/12 of 360,000, which comes from the carrying capacity of a voluntary reduction on the airport's maximum throughput. There are FAA orders on that too that we can get into. Yes, sir.
Eric, as a practical matter, have we heard from controllers about what number they feel comfortable handling in the pattern at any given time? I know the FAA may say 8, but, or
the comment from the FAA controllers has been that the number of traffic in the airspace is not sufficient to cause them any alarm for safety, and they feel they could carry much more. So procedures, kind of a duplicate of the checklist, because the noise abatement plan that's before you was designed to kind of be in a folded in a quadrant format, so it fits in any sort of form. It fits in a pilot pocket, fits in a plane pocket, fits in a brochure rack. The goal is to get the voluntary noise abatement plan so it can fit and just be carryable in your back pocket. But it adds some detail. So climbing out at best rate of climb at VY ensures the aircraft are as high as possible, as quickly as possible, and as safely as possible. VY is an aircraft's maximum rate of climb, and it is different for every plane. You will notice every traffic pattern is different. There is no one universal traffic pattern. They may share a similar shape and size and style, but functionally they are different every single time. Reduce RPM and power is able. Lower propeller speeds to produce less noise. Fly standard or higher glide path is once again repeated. A shallow approach exposes neighbors to more noise than may be necessary. A steeper approach minimizes the noise impact on neighborhoods. Overfly major roads and corridors and or open space when able. The goal is to overfly less populated areas, which would lessen the noise impact on surrounding communities. It will never be perfect. It is not possible to be perfect and have no impact. The goal is to minimize that impact from the pilot's perspective as much as possible. It's an educational tool for the pilots to understand, I have to be cognizant that there's neighbors down there, there's people down there. How can I fly as a pilot in a better, more friendly way?
Is there any way, and I think the answer is no, Eric, but can we confront reality and look at satellite imaging of the population density around this field? And the idea, there's not a hell of a lot of open space or major, the idea of let's fly over Wadsworth sounds good on paper. In practicality, it's almost silly, right? I mean,
from the traffic patterns perspective, that's probably true.
Yeah.
From an in-route and out-route perspective, from practice areas, I wouldn't say that's necessarily true. There's always ways to necessarily fly higher or fly over highways. Or there are empty spots between Boulder and Lafayette, Louisville that planes often do fly through. But from a local perspective in the traffic pattern, that's why we would recommend high and tight, because it keeps them and minimizes their overflight of the area. Maintain pattern altitude of 6,500 feet, which is as high as they currently can go. We can have some discussion about potentiality of flying higher, but for now, because it's official, a 6,500 traffic pattern altitude is as high as a plane can go.
and I'm not sure I want to die on that hill, but I'm really thinking about it. And there is nothing published that says the traffic pattern is 6,500 feet. And Jason Servo, I don't know if he's here or not.
He's here.
Yeah, it was a reasonable thought to see if we could change the culture to where the pattern altitude is 50 or 66 or even 6673, which is the field elevation. 67. Yeah, field elevation is 5673, so it'd be 67 perhaps.
Yeah, so the traffic pattern.
Scoured the facility directory, the chart supplement, the Airman's information manual, and there's 1,000 feet above field elevation.
1,000 feet above field elevation is the standard traffic pattern altitude that you'll find at every other airport you'll probably ever go to.
Of course, yeah.
Some airports have multiple traffic pattern altitudes based on the kind of aircraft that are flying in there, whether it's a combination of single engines or twins or jets or whatever's in the pattern. If they feel it necessary to have multiple elevations, they may be able to.
Now, I understand that it's 1,000 feet AGL if you're on a downwind for the north runway, because basically the elevation about at Highway 36 is about 55 and change. But the elevation is gradually.
Yeah, so
we could live with.
the traffic pattern altitude at the airport has nothing to do with field elevation. So I want to take you back in time, 30 years ago, where Stapleton was operating downtown. Stapleton's traffic overflew all the airports in the area. And because of the approaches and departures that came out of Stapleton, they held the traffic pattern and in-route structure of BJC lower. So where we should be at 1,000, the FAA never actually fixed it when Stapleton moved. They kept it because it was consistent. The FAA doesn't really like change. And so for them, 6,500 was the law of the land. There was no reason to change it, even if they could.
Yeah, that was my point about changing the culture rather than, I mean, Airman's information manual says 1,000 feet above ground level.
Correct. And
Unless otherwise noted in the chart supplement, doesn't say a word about it.
Yeah, if you watch aircraft coming out from north or south, anywhere out of Class D airspace, you can watch them cruising at what would be a higher elevation. And then as they hit Class D, they are already at 6,500 feet. So they're told by tower to descend into 6,500 feet as part of the in-route structure. That's a FAA task that we would need to address. And I know it's been brought up. Pilots have brought it up as a way to try to help minimize their impact for in-route and for traffic pattern. If a plane can climb at VY to 6,800, it's 200 more feet that they would have, and that lessens their noise impact. The point of contention on that, if such a thing would be, is that pilots would have to mail and make sure they told the FAA they would support a higher elevation and make that known. So that's where we are on that. We've told the FAA informally and formally in some cases that we would like to see that. They would like to see a more universal approach and more feedback from pilots as to what that is. And that's not necessarily pilots. Community members certainly could ask for higher transition altitudes and traffic pattern altitudes as well. There's no set, as you know, there's no set limit. It's just understood to be 1,000. In our case, 800.
I was told today, I flew from Longmont to here, and the plane I was flying, they told me to descend down to pattern altitude 6,500. They specifically told me to do that. So they're really pushing that. I don't know why. Like I said, I think 6,700 is a better altitude for our airport. Or
All right, on the back side is a map of the traffic patterns and with some guidance, additional guidance that tries to repeat and try to be as repetitive on this voluntary noise abatement plan as we possibly can. The goal is as an educational tool for the pilots to understand and try to be more respectful. It's not regulatory. It's not even, it's an illustrative comment on what traffic patterns look like. As pilots and as community members, you will notice planes do not always follow this track. It's a performance issue in which they will fly what they can. So on the plan, on the backside, the dotted lines represent the FAA Joint Order 7400.2P traffic pattern safety area paths. That would be classically what you would look at as a traffic pattern for the FAA. When they're looking at traffic patterns, flying and directing aircraft, the 7200.2P is what they would necessarily consider as being the traffic pattern for the airport. It's also the lines you would see on our current voluntary noise abatement plan. Those shaded areas are the 7200.2P traffic patterns. What we try to do is recognize that planes don't fly at the 7200.2P traffic patterns. They fly generally at the 1 mile standard pattern. So what I try to do is highlight the fact that that's what reality is. There's a number of different guides on it to give geo markers for pilots about where different things are between Autry Park, Kentner Place, and what they might be able to do at those locations. An aircraft flying and doing traffic pattern at the airport for the south pattern would be expected to try to stay within the primary pattern zone and stay out of the extensions, which would mean no flying over Rock Creek and no flying past Wadsworth. Try to keep things as short and condensed and tight as they possibly can. The pattern is shown at a 1 mile standard traffic pattern. I know we talked about high and tight and inside FedEx. So anywhere inside that traffic pattern zone that you see colored in green would be where you would generally expect to see aircraft flying. Not always. It's a performance thing. They can't always stay on that. Plan says that if an aircraft performs more than 4 operations in any extended zone, they should consider an alternate time or airport to conduct operations. And that's a cumulative thing between, not cumulative, it's a total of 4 between the 2 yellow zones. So if you're flying around and you're flying on the traffic pattern and the tower tells you to extend your upwind, downwind, cross traffic or whatever, and you're doing that more than 4 times, you really should consider flying at a different time or conducting traffic patterns at another airport. The standard south pattern zone, which was shown in green, is a 1 mile standard pattern. Once again, it repeats the pilot. Climb at VY and lower RPMs as able. Keep tight inside FedEx if they're able to. Avoid abrupt power changes if they're able. Abrupt power changes are generally more noticeable than steady RPMs, and so it can give a Doppler effect as a plane is flying along. There is some information on the lower left-hand side about airfield's elevation, transition altitude, pattern, some communication channels, and some runway length and width. Do call out Kettner Place as a place for pilots to understand that they should be conducting their turn to base on 30 left. Once again, the southern pilot does talk about the fact that the traffic pattern, if you're flying the traffic pattern and you're extending past Wadsworth, you really should probably consider trying to do traffic patterns at another airport or another time. The north pattern, or for overflow at nighttime, is also shown as a 1 mile standard pattern. It is bigger than the southern runway because the north runway is bigger and it is longer, so the traffic pattern will be bigger and it will be longer. For night operations, if there's more than 4 aircraft in the pattern, the pilot should consider an alternate time or airport to conduct those operations and not to extend past the limits shown on that map. So a pilot, if they find themselves extending past the shown limits on the north pattern, they really should consider flying at another time or place, and there is no extension allowed for that area. On the right side of that side of the page is some general directions for pilots about how they would operate that based on landmarks. For nighttime or when ATC is closed, or as directed for ATC for the north pattern, it talks about the 1 mile standard pattern that's shown in blue. Once again, repeats, if there's more than 4 aircraft in the pattern, they should consider an alternate time or place to conduct operations. And it provides some landmarks about when to have their turns completed by. The same is true for the next part, for the other runway, or for daytime when ATC is open or as directed by ATC for the south pattern. They should operate from 12 right through 0 left, and it shows a standard 1 mile pattern. If you do conduct any more than 4 operations within that extended zone, you should consider another time or place. When we're talking about the consented zone, the House bill talks about frequency of operations. In order to control frequency, we control frequency by the total number of planes in the pattern within a given distance. So if the pattern grows, it will increase the carrying capacity of the taxi or of that traffic pattern. We don't want to artificially encourage additional aircraft in the pattern. We want to keep control of frequency. So without telling them 8 planes within an hour or 8 planes within half an hour, we control frequency by something a pilot actually can tell, and that's how many planes are in the pattern or where they are, not what the clock says. And so if there is any, like I said, any more than 4 operations within that zone, they should conduct operations elsewhere, and it provides landmarks on a pilot's information on where to go or where they should have their turns conducted by. And once again, it does provide guidance for pilots on to not to attempt to not overfly populated areas, to overfly highways as possible. And once again, repeats that it's a voluntary noise abatement plan. It's not regulatory. The airport cannot set regulatory patterns for any of the voluntary noise abatement procedures. And it really is up to ATC discretion about what the traffic pattern actually looks like. What we're trying to do with the traffic pattern for the extended zones is to say to a pilot, even if ATC says you can, you should consider if you should. And so that's the goal with extended pattern. Can you? Maybe. Should you? Maybe not. It's an educational tool for the pilots to better understand their relationship with the community and how we can help pilots understand that impact. That is the noise abatement plan as it's before you today. This is only the first meeting that we will be talking about the voluntary noise abatement plan. We'll also be talking about the noise abatement plan in December, and we'll be talking about it in January. After January, when we've looked at the noise abatement plan, it will go in front of the board sometime in February, the Board of County Commissioners, for their look and their thoughts and guidance and approval. As you can see, it is something that kind of a contentious thing for people. So it's important that you take your time to look it over, consider what changes you think are appropriate, consider the feedback the community's given you, and then provide guidance on what you think changes could be. And then we'll return in December with edits and changes, and we'll repeat the process for the next 2 months. If you don't have any questions today, I don't need to answer any, but otherwise, if you have questions about what's been for you, I can try to answer those now.
Here, the question I would have is, my guess would be that you will roll this out to a number of stakeholders and pick up their comments on it, or you, from what you just said at the end of your presentation, are you expecting those comments to flow through this advisory board?
I would expect comments to flow through every vein that is open to the community and for the pilots to do so.
Everybody. Okay.
I would expect comments to come from everywhere. They could use the centralized email to Airport Advisory Board members, sort of thing. They can email you directly. I have no doubt they'll email me, and I would imagine they'll email other authority figures as well. So comments will come from everywhere, and we can implement them as we're able.
Okay, thank you.
How about those joining us online? Any questions or comments?
For the board.
For the board, yeah, for the board. On the table?
I would like,
Questions? Oh, go ahead, Barb.
oh, sorry. I would just like to add that Civil Air Patrol has been advised to voluntarily adhere to the NAP. So they are unaware of it and do intend to adhere to it.
Thank you, Barb.
Sure.
And no questions for me as I read through all this. I just want to thank Eric and you guys for putting this together. I think this is very comprehensive and will definitely help not necessarily solve some issues, but have a better conversation moving forward. I do think personally one thing I would lend my voice to and weight towards is probably the biggest opportunity we have is increasing the traffic pattern altitude. And if there's any way, either personally or through the board, we can do that, I definitely would love to pursue that.
Thank you, Paul.
I agree with that on the pattern altitude. I think that I see that as a priority, and I don't see it as something that pilots would object to. On the contrary, I think they'd be fine with it. I guess I would also encourage us to try to come up with as many ways as we can to communicate this to pilots that aren't necessarily students with a flying club or students with I don't know, just look at different ways to get the word out. There's a lot of pilots that may not be, I'm not sure how we reach them. That, if they're not flying through one of the flying clubs or if they're not a hangar owner or something like that, I'm not sure how we reach those pilots effectively. And I think we ought to kind of see if there's some non-standard ways where we might be able to get that word out.
Maybe some signage at the end of the runway. I mean, we can't have 3 paragraphs out there, but just a brief blurb on noise abatement policies, key points.
Something I wonder, I mean, is there a way to even publish it as a note?
As a what?
As a notate? You'd have to have the FAA cooperation to do that.
I'd be surprised if they would, yeah, I think it's a great idea, but I just think, I think this is great. I think there's a lot of work been done here and a lot of stuff, and I think this is a good step forward.
Yeah, it's excellent. I think it's, as long as, to your point, I think there's gotta be some down and dirty quick way of for transient pilots and just quick reminders for the student pilots. Because as a transient pilot, I never look at an airport's website before I fly into the place and right out loud. Yeah, I don't know if I looked at the notice. I must say that out loud.
I didn't hear anything.
It's 700 pages long.
Yeah.
So a sign at the end of the runway saying.
The conversation probably would be in the digital supplement more than anywhere else. So the former AFD, I guess, would be the location that you would probably find noise abatement procedures.
Yeah.
And those noise abatement procedures would have to be caked down into the fundamentals of what departure and arrivals look like, because at that point in time, that's the thing they're gonna be most concerned.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, they would be.
90% of the success of this plan is gonna depend on teaching the teachers, getting the instructors on board, and having them teach their students these procedures and having them force their students to fly according to the procedures.
No, and that's true. I know that when our conversation with the flight schools and the FBOs, they're more than happy to have those monthly meetings with their staff, talk to the CFIs, recurrently talk to them about how to respect the I don't know if say respect the VNP, that's the wrong word. To follow the VNP so it respects the intent of the bill would be the correct way to say that. And that is what they want to do, is have those conversations. What affects that more than anything else is turnover. And so as pilots are hired and CFI finds other job, it's how to catch the CFIs not only on their onboarding, but on a regular basis that they may need more than just monthly. So that's a conversation that has to be followed through. But you're right, 90% of its success or any VNP success is always with the pilot and how the teacher can be educated to teach it.
Is there a way to mandate the review of that on a regular basis as a condition of operating a business out of the airport?
So we can't require them to do anything that is not in the federal regulations. So even if we had a minimum standard to the rule and reg that said that you will encourage your pilots to follow the rules and reg, that's a punitive action that's based on the VNP. The VNP is a voluntary protocol. So you can't mandate punishment based on something that's voluntary.
That's not what I'm saying. Then. But could you mandate the fact that it needs to be reviewed with their instructors, or with their employees?
You're using the word mandate. We can guide them to do it. We can't force them to
I'm
do it.
gonna tell you, the flight schools are all having meetings, we're all getting together, we're sitting down, we're discussing this, and we're all for this, we're all working together to, implement this. We're coming up with training programs individually and stuff like that, so we're excited about working with this program and implementing this. And that's all the school from the field.
So I heard we're gonna have 2 more chances to weigh in, make edits and recommendations, but just want any other last initial thoughts before we've still got 4 items on the agenda tonight.
One thought I had was that, do we need to add something concerning safety? That obviously these are great things as we go forward, but we all know that at times, due to all kinds of factors, weather or other aircraft, et cetera, that we should have a safety consideration, of course, too.
So that's certainly possible to be more verbose about the safety aspect of it. On the back page of the noise abatement plan, which has the maps of the traffic patterns, the second line does say ATC may direct you to fly otherwise, follow air traffic control, and operate safely. Consider following all voluntary protocols at other times. The FAA will mandate that the airport is always safe and that the voluntary noise abatement plan cannot make the airport less safe. And so talking about safety and talking about it in a way in which encourages safety is certainly beneficial. And if there are recommendations on how to update that verbiage to accomplish that better, I would look forward to seeing those recommendations.
Okay. All right, let's move on to item B, the policy review and bylaws development. And
I can take that. I'll kick it off, and then Anthony, will review the bylaws. I just want to mention, when you all were appointed to the board, or actually when this board was formed back, I think in 2019, it was formed because of a policy that the BCC adopted. And this is linked onto to the Airport Advisory Board webpage, so you can go there and review this. We've just been requested to put some eyes on this. And I think the ideal would be that this is revised if it needs revision. Next time there's an appointment cycle for the board, so that'll be next summer, sort of. I will call out, there's like one obvious error, which is about not recusing yourself. By not recusing him or herself on matters under consideration. We know that needs to be fixed. But then I think the more kind of substantial conversation that should be had is around the board makeup. Because I know we've heard public comment before, and I've heard, I think, commissioner comment as well, that would there ever be a reason to open up membership to a broader geographic area? And the way I see that potentially being addressed is we reference this airport influence area map that comes from the last airport master plan, but it is a very oddly defined boundary. Some communities that are close to the airport are in it, but some communities that are also close to the airport are not. So like a simple fix could be, memberships to anyone who's in underneath the class delta of the airport would fit that criteria. So I'm just gonna leave that as something to think about for now, and we'll bring that back later. But I want to make sure we give some time to Anthony to go through the actual bylaws, because this board does not have any yet.
Yeah, so, as been mentioned, this board does not have bylaws, and so I just want to sort of explain to you what bylaws are. Just a fancy word for rules and procedures, essentially. And so my goal here was to live within the policy that already is in place, but also sort of define some parameters by which you all will conduct business in this meeting. The goal here is today just to get you guys used to what the concept is, and then if you have any general comments, the same thing with the previous item on the agenda, please feel free to review it, come back with some comments, because this is not something that we're adopting right now. We want you all to chime in and provide some insight. So I don't think that there's a whole lot to talk about in terms of, purpose and authority. We've already gone over that with you, in a previous meeting, during the trainings. The one thing that I did want to mention, and really, I think this is sort of the catalyst of why we thought bylaws were appropriate, is you all voiced to us that you wanted a more formalized way to get your opinions, your recommendations from this room here over to the BCC. And so we have some other advisory committees in the county, and that is what I base this off of, where they actually will have a formal written advisory opinion from the board. And so this procedure that's outlined in this bylaws would allow you all to vote on a matter, whatever it may be on the agenda, and then actually have a written resolution that, while advisory, would still be presented to the BCC when the item goes for briefing and to an agenda memo and eventually to a BCC hearing.
So this may be a good chance, just so that others know too, delineating between an advisory board and a governing board, just because we're throwing out those terms and
Sure.
just not too detailed, but just a
Yeah,
little bit of
no,
a synopsis there.
Yeah, so obviously, there are other types of boards like the Board of Adjustment or Planning and Zoning, where they are actually making sort of a judicial, quasi-judicial decision that actually holds weight in law, and can actually bind the BCC. Under certain circumstances. Here, like the Open Space Advisory Committee, we have a group of folks in the community that want to share their opinions and share their insight on certain things that affect the airport. And you all can give advice to the BCC. As we mentioned previously, the Board of County Commissioners is not obligated to heed your advice or to follow specifically what you say in your resolution. But what we would do through this is we would have agenda items that you would be able to vote on. And in the event that you voted in the affirmative, to pass it on as advice to the BCC, there would actually be a formal written document that Ben and I are working on currently, that we could actually have parameters written and actually provide the specific conditions that you see for a given issue, and actually present that to the BCC as a part of a briefing packet that would eventually turn into a resolution should the BCC accept that advice.
Thank you.
And so I don't know that there's a whole lot to talk about. I think it's probably best consumed on your own. But I just want to point out that there are voting procedures. There's conflict of interest language in there, that we can get into more after you review it and explain in what events bylaws would need to pop up. One thing that I know always freaks people out is there is a reference to Robert's rules in there. That is our attempt at making these meetings a little bit more streamlined and providing more of a sense of quorum and creating kind of the parameters by which you guys can interact with the public and how things can be brought for voting, things like that. However, I always want to emphasize that although we strive to use Robert's rules, that'll never invalidate a decision that you all would make. So I don't want that to be a point of focus. Really what I want tonight is just to sort of introduce the idea, and then, like I said, I think you can take it home, think about it, see if you have any questions, if you have any misunderstandings. If you think certain things could be tweaked, please bring those comments back, and we can, at least I see, after the first of the year, eventually take this and pass this and make this actual, actually a thing. You all would vote on it and adopt it. And so this really is your project. So please come back with comments and let me know what you think.
So our adoption would not require BCC approval.
That's correct. Yeah, per county policy, you all are permitted to adopt bylaws to the extent they do not conflict with overarching county policy. And the way I've drafted this is I've sort of added the minimum amount of structure so that there is both freedom for you all to conduct business the way you want, while also still maintaining compliance with county policy.
Would it be possible to get it as a shared document that we could all work on with proposed wording, things like that?
Approaching it that way would probably invoke open meetings laws types of issues. I mean, that's in a way conducting business with when all of you had the opportunity to interact with it at once. I would say bring in your comments like anything else on your own, and then obviously we can take those in and try to see whether or not that they're appropriate. I can't imagine you guys get too crazy with this, but, yeah, I would recommend you all bringing in comments individually so that we're, maintaining a sense of, compliance with open meetings laws.
Good. And the goal would be to adopt at the December meeting. Okay.
I was just saying, I think it'd be best to probably have an opportunity to, if you all decide, put something on the agenda again, if you want to discuss it further, if there are any like major questions that you all have where you're not understanding what the goal of this is, or if you think there is something that needs to be changed, we can bring that back in December after the first of the year. We could pass this, and then, I might be getting a little too far ahead of myself, so Ben, correct me here, but I think eventually what this would also allow is for, you know, regular elections, things like that for officers, all that good stuff that would happen naturally at the beginning of the year anyways.
That's why
So
we're trying
this-
to get it done in December.
Yeah. And so maybe an ideal timeline maybe then would be to do an election or something like that in February, if we have the infrastructure in place, which would be the bylaws to allow you all to do that in a more formal setting.
Not that we think this group hasn't been working great. That's not a statement of how you have ran as chair or anything like that, so, but it just.
I would agree with that.
Something we want to work towards.
Questions, initial comments?
Good.
Okay.
Online friends, any comments or questions? All right, we're gonna keep moving. Airport updates.
All right, to the usual updates right now, in terms of the AIP projects, Kilo Delta. We're currently working on the kind of the final design of some cul-de-sacs on what will be called Calendar Drive on one side. Actually, it's open as Calendar Drive now, and a street to be named on the west side of Kilo when that road is severed. I did want to mention, as part of this project, we're actually taking on a locally funded project to construct a fence along the entire airport, most of the airport property that is probably in developable condition. So that's something Wolpert is helping us with on right now. It's under design, and we will go out for bid for that at the same time. We kind of have to do this because we are busting a hole in the fence to extend a taxiway. So there was some level of new fencing that had to be installed anyway, and so we ultimately decided we would just construct a fence in its ultimate limits. So what we're waiting on right now is just some more utility work, also a safety risk management panel with the FAA, and still that final determination from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineering, which we expect in probably December or January. The other AIP, big AIP project, Basin 160, this has just been waiting on the safety risk management panel for a while, finally scheduled for November 21st. So we hope to start construction shortly thereafter. So when you see a bunch of dirt work, and there'll be NOTAMs about, you know, construction equipment crossing over 30 left, that'll also involve a closure of that runway at certain times. We'll communicate that out far in advance, but that's the point of that safety risk management panel, is to kind of flag any concerns when we start doing that work. In terms of unleaded fuel, we actually now have it's called a qualifications-based selection. I like to call it an RFQ. Actually out on the street, it closes December 2nd. So that would hire the engineering firm to design the tank and any modifications to our bulk fuel facility. So we'll select that firm, go into design, and hopefully bid out that project in 2025. And then in terms of the Part 150 noise study, we've been having some initial conversations with the consultant for that, and are working towards, they're gonna have a big ask for all this data from not just us, but from a bunch of local jurisdictions, because there's a big land use component to the study. And then we're also working through the timeline of public engagement and how that relates to this upcoming community engagement plan that the airport will be developing. I would anticipate this being brought to this board perhaps in February of next year, and then a public workshop perhaps in March. That's kind of the draft timeline as we conceive it now. And that's it for updates. Any questions?
It's probably a stupid question, but is the intent on the unleaded fuel to have it available at the self-service pumps too?
It's not. I guess we'd be open to ideas to have it there. I think the priority for the airport became a truck, because when we sat down with the flight schools, they thought it would be almost unworkable to have a self-serve tank because their model of as many aircraft as start departing in the mornings, they just envisioned a line of aircraft all waiting to fuel up at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. and ultimately would result in not much conversion to leaded or unleaded fuel. So the arrangement they liked best is to make sure that there's a truck on the field that can fill up their planes at night time when their aircraft aren't being used. So that's the priority right now. I would expect at a minimum signature, we'll have to transition over their 100 low lead tank when the timeline for the FAA and EPA is, hits hopefully sooner.
Questions?
I have this for, are we, other matters?
That's it.
Okay, good. So the question I have, from hearing the public comment here tonight, there's lots of comment towards us or talk about navigation easements and prior navigation easements and lawsuits and things like that and requests of us to do certain things with regard to these topics. And I feel like I'm completely unqualified to be commenting on things of those technical legal issues. I wonder if it would be productive for this board to have the county attorney either under the attorney-client privilege produce just kind of a primer for us on that, or a white paper for us on, navigation easements or update on litigation or anything like that, or even an executive session update for us as board members to help inform us. Obviously, maybe the rest of you are more up on it than I am, but
I'm not familiar with the easements.
but I feel like I'm at a big disadvantage or a loss when that kind of stuff comes up, feeling like we're not really in a position to even enter that into conversations, given, the current status that I have with it anyway, so.
Yeah, I would agree that since you feel that you can't comment on it and probably don't feel qualified to comment on the legal aspects, we should have an executive session with an attorney from the county to explain to us exactly what is in effect and what isn't in effect.
I agree.
All right. County Attorney's Office, heard the request.
I have further requests.
Before we close out, any other comments on or off?
I have one really off the wall question. How many acres of land does the airport own?
What are we at, 1,100?
We used to say 1,700 acres, but that included the verb. And so as we've been selling off that, it's almost an entire section, nearly 400 acres. I shouldn't quote an exact figure now, but I would say we're around that, somewhere over 1,000.
So it's 1,700 minus MERV.
Yeah, well, yeah, and other stuff we've divested ourselves of. I'd agree it's somewhere in that around 1,000 range.
Okay, thanks. Said it was off the wall.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
6:28. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for public comment joining us tonight as well.